Gray fans are probably going to be a little salty for the next 2 weeks. It only made sense that this first bit into the fight was going to be Viernes first, because he just put in the humanoid form, and now he's got this human form with wings coming out of his ass, and he's used a white guy pharaoh. I thought it was just really funny because it fits into the meme. But Gray was just going for direct attacks. I think it makes sense for, especially in the human form, because it's going to be a lot weaker than their full power, just to go and figure out what works. He's going for his standard attacks. Obviously, Gray, as is, just going for his go-to move of all well, Ice Make Lance, but the upgraded version actually making a return, Freezing Lance. And it just gets completely noped by Viernes. He just breaks it. I mean, obviously this isn't going to be too much of a problem for him. I like that we both saw him just naturally going for like no diff attacks where he's just waving his hand, but also him using abilities for defense. I thought that was really cool. Gray does Ice Make Death Scythe, which is actually really cool to see come back around, but Viernes just turns it into Gold Dust, which is also really badass because his ability is, he says, he just directly turns things into gold, and this is, I would assume, his dragon ability and not his alchemy going into play. But he is like, he essentially is, you know, turning it into gold, but he's turning it into dust. So on top of, you know, the effect, he's fully taking away any form of impact of the weapon of Gray hitting him. I imagine if he just turned it into gold, the metal gold hitting him wouldn't do anything. I imagine it was just a flex. He's just wanting to show off a bit. And once he hits Gray too, he turns part of him to gold. So that just tells me if he grabs a hold of you, he's going to turn you into gold. He's got just a full Midas ability going on, which is really badass. I like the fact that how it's used, it's not very crazy, like directly. It's just like, yeah, the stuff around him, he just transforms it into solid gold, but he's doing it in just really neat ways. Like his first attacks, like he does this gold rush, which just does this AoE, and it makes gold of the just general area around him. In his human form, obviously, like I said, it's going to be at a fraction of the dragon form as we've saw. So what we saw in that bit was, like, when he was starting to get mad, it was like going over mountains and taking over cities and town area sizes and forests, turning it all into gold. Here's just his like first opening bit. I don't know, it's maybe like 200 feet across or something like that. It's not crazy, but well, no, some of the buildings are of decent size off in the distance. So I mean, like, maybe you give it like a pretty decent AoE of just this of this zone and some of the buildings. Nothing crazy, but at the same time, you put him in this area of gold where he has full control, and he's already just generally really powerful, and all he has to do is grab a hold of you, and he's gonna transform you into gold because it doesn't wear off during this fight. And I'm hoping that it's going to play into where Gray is going to advance out of here. And I'll talk about that a little bit once we get further into the chapter. But I thought it was just really cool, but it was so disrespectful for Viernes to, like, one of his attacks, he does gold arrow, and he turns a bunch of birds, they're just flying by, into gold, and then just drops them down at Gray. And it's a really cool attack. I like that in idea. It's not directly the same as how Gray fights, but it is in similar manner, because you are, the way with Maker Magic, you are creating, you know, a certain shape with your ability, whereas with what Viernes is doing, he's just turning things specifically around him into gold and then utilizing that. And it's like you can look at like Leon using his attacks, and he does this with ice, and it's like, oh well, Viernes is doing something similar, but he's outright just turning birds in the area to gold. And I thought it was really funny that Gray commented on that, because I was thinking about it as I was like looking at the panels like the first time, and I was like, that's cool, but at the same time I was like, damn, those poor birds, man. And they're like, immediately after, Gray thought this is saying the same. It's like, how could you do that to those poor birds? Like, they just were doing nothing. And it's at that moment where he realizes that on top of that, Viernes used alchemy to turn the ground around Gray into magma. And he's just surprised by it. He's not really too bothered. Gray just freezes it, moves out of the way. It's very clear Viernes was just using that as a distraction to get Gray to pretty much just keep going. Makes a shield, immediately shatters the shield. There's no real problem with that. It keeps just pelting it with all these birds. He's really unlucky of just the timing of this point of the year where the birds are just everywhere apparently. I mean, it's not like there's unlikely to be a fair amount of birds in the area, especially with all this commotion, but it's like, I wonder how long until he would have to do something else. Would he use gold arrow on something else in the area, like people, or would he switch to a different attack? Is this attack only locked out? That'd be kind of neat if he has all these different gold style attacks where they're not named very complex like, but they're just very they're very just situational. He said, oh well, hang on, here's my gold. I'm trying to think of like what would be a really good example. I'm trying to think of it like just gold giant, and it's a whale or something. Just slams into him, solid gold whale. He's like, this is a ability I can only use in this part of the world. I bet you don't know why. And there's just some guys like, well, this is where all these whales are. There's nowhere else in the world that these whales are at. And he's like, well, damn. Okay, fair enough. I think that would be just really funny. I think that'd just be really goofy for him. But I think his gold manipulating abilities will obviously be more so than just, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to turn nearby animals into gold and fling it at you. I mean, we saw him use alchemy to just create a tree and turn that into gold and then use that. So I think it's cool when you really combine these things with Viernes, that he does whatever and then turns that into gold, because at that point it's easier for him to manipulate it, just because him being a gold dragon, well, the gold dragon at the highest level possible that we're aware of, unless there's a super dragon god, but as it were, it's still where his he is in the most comfortable fighting, but still using different abilities. I'm hoping that through the fight we see him make some more concept embodiments. Maybe we'll see that in the next chapter. But Gray doesn't get honestly put in too much of like that bad of a spot in this chapter. He's never given this point where it looks like Gray has the advantage, and I didn't think that even if we didn't get the interruption in the chapter, that Gray was gonna just, oh yeah, he's just gonna 1v1 Viernes. Gray needs to get, like, the idea of Gray somehow fighting even the humanoid Viernes was like, let's not even talk about full dragon powered Viernes, but just talk about the human form. He would need something fair to cover the gap, and with his devil slaying, you could give him a upgraded new form, but when it comes to the dragon form of Viernes, you would have to give Gray like complete additional ability. He would have to go and like gain something all new that combines in with his ice making his devil slaying. That would be something significant. I don't know. Like, he has to find the ice demon. Like, maybe there's some super crazy ice demon. Like, there's some demons that were, that predate Zareth, and there's only a handful left, and the ice demon is one of them. And Grey Ghost finds it, beats it, and then absorbs its power, and he's able to then come back and then do these things. But I just don't really feel like he would be able to jump the gun and fight Viernes 1v1 in the status, because he was the one that was in the worst scenario in terms of really opponent, because when it comes to fighting Mercphobia versus Viernes, it's just so obvious. There's so much more layers of bullshit you would have to deal with fighting Viernes, and on top of that, his whole thing of turning you into gold, it would just be so cumbersome, because in having to deal with it in general. Obviously, you're literally getting weighed down. Gray talks about how much heavier he is as he's fighting, but I mean, like, just the idea that you have to you pretty much have to dodge. You're not allowed to get touched by this guy, and you don't know what abilities you have are going to work on him on the next. The idea, though, if Gray pushed his devil slaying, the curse aspect of it, or even the black magic aspect of it on top of that, could put in the as a danger to Viernes, but that's something that we haven't seen Gray go in further depth with his devil slaying form. So unless he's going to do something in the next couple of chapters, but we'll see. After he's hurt by the second gold arrow, and again, he's still in base. I don't think Gray ever in this point is really going to be like, the best he could do is pull up some new power up, and maybe he starts to contend with human Viernes. But the problem is Viernes has zero limitations, or well, he has limitations on his character and like rules of the verse. I mean, like in terms of like shackles or plot reasons that he is limited to X, Y, or Z of his normal power, he should be completely unrestrained and be able to use his full capabilities at any point. So it's like Gray just needs to get something to move forward, but we'll see on that one, because I think maybe the reason it was more so was to show Gray the whole alchemy aspect of things, but also to get him set up for something. Maybe the Lekka fight, we'll see, because Selene for some reason decides to show up, which I was very happy to see Selene. I wanted to get into Gray and Viernes, and then I wouldn't have minded a chunk in, maybe like halfway in we go over to at least see Wendy and all them and see what's going on with Selene. We have it fixed, I think. One thing I noticed, and this could just be because of the way that the shading is in this panel, but Selene's eyes, when she shows up, like the whole portal opens and she just comes and sits her beautiful ass all the way on through. Her eyes look all shaded and dark, similar to how it was when we saw the, right after she started to go crazy from the Lacrima showing up. It could just be the way that the panel is presented, but I don't know. I want to keep that just on the back burner because it's a little suspicious to me, because other times we've seen Selene, I don't think it's been the same. I'd have to go back and check. I don't really want to right now, but I don't, it's just very, it seems very eerie to me. I don't know. But right after that, her eyes are normal, but I don't know. There's just something about it. But once she shows up, I mean, Viernes doesn't really seem too bothered by it. I like the fact he called her just Moondragon and not Moondragon God. I'm intrigued by that. Why is that? Maybe that's a hint on something that's going on. But she ends up as well, pops right out of her portal is Wendy, and that's around where the chapter ends, and we see like Gray's just surprised on things. I wouldn't mind if we swapped opponents around and Selene fought Viernes, but other than that, because I would really like Gray to have an opponent that he could beat right now. Because if you put Gray up against a couple opponents and say like he beat Lekka and beat maybe Scoleon came back around, beat Scoleon, beat another big character, and maybe then was like, oh yeah, maybe he fought Suzaku and got revenge for everything that happened before when they were out in Elentier. And maybe it's just a thing for him where it's like, because Gray was able to acknowledge him, so it's like maybe you just give Gray a moment where, because he didn't really fight him, now he actually can fight him and do something. And it'd be like if he beat Suzaku, it's like, okay, well now he is at this level where I can see him doing these greater things. But it's just such a big gap for him to do anything substantial in Viernes 1v1. Because even if you put enough in there for him to be even, to really be a danger to human form, Viernes, he can just switch back into his dragon form. And without something in addition for Gray kind of crazy going into the fight, like some form of new ability, Viernes should be able just to turn himself into a concept again. I don't know if there's any like requirements or anything that are involved, but as far as we know, the alchemy side of things, he can just do it. It doesn't require any additional anything really. But I really liked him in the chapter for one, and that's one thing I want to talk about with Viernes. Is Viernes had a little bit of showing in here, like not a lot. I really like that Gray commented too on the fact that he's like, oh yeah, you can talk, because we know he didn't really talk too much in the initial fight, and I like too that we're already seeing him use abilities and neat ways of his gold dragon powers and alchemy, more so than in the fight we got before, because it shows that like once we had the dragon gods come back, I knew that it was like, okay, well, we didn't have that much of a big display from him before because we were going to have a fight with him here, and before he just got rushed and everything was really bad in his favor when it came to getting that vessel with Athena just being able to work in Natsu's favor. It was just bad for him there. But I mean, it's like, oh yeah, it was all in a way though where all these things set up and beat him, and it was only to set up his return. And when he got returned, now he doesn't have any of these problems, and he's just kind of going around. And I noticed in the chapter, and this is one of the things I really want to bring up before I end it, because I'm at like 16. I'll probably talk. I want to talk a little bit more about Gray and why I think it'd be good for Gray to fight Lekka right now instead. But the thing about the chapter with oh god, where am I? I hope I don't lose my train of thought. Hang on. All right. So I really would. For a second, I had this in my head and then I spaced on it instantly. But a bit in the chapter that I'm curious if we're gonna get a little bit in depth of explanation once we figure out the fact that Selene stuff is already resolved, and maybe that's going to be one of the points similar to the little bit with Mercphobia's. Selene's was surprise, bitch, it's already done. And the mystery of that and waiting on specifics of that is going to be the more reason of that bit's whole layout. I would be more so because I want to get Diablos members over here. I really want to see Diablos members. Are they going to all team up to fight? I think it'd be really cool if Selene didn't participate, but she brought all of Diablos, and then everyone got healed really fast, and then went into the fight. And we had all of Diablos, Gray and Wendy, and they fought, you know, maybe even like include like a couple new Diablos members, and then have them fight Viernes. And it be though with Gray, you give Gray the Dragon Slayer buff from Wendy, bam, Gray can be in the fight, and then you have them all team up. It'd be really badass. But with Viernes is the only one that wasn't seemingly feral, because Selene when we first saw her affected from the lacrima, she was doing, you know, seemingly the same thing as how Mercphobia was and how Alderaan was, where they just act feral. They don't seem to talk and have any form of coherent conversation once they have, you know, as long as this lacrima's around. And with Viernes has disappeared, right? So Viernes, he just decided that he was going to, I would imagine, not be manipulated by the effects of what's going on with the other dragon gods. And so when you look at them, comparison to like Selene's is a question of what happened. What with Viernes is just like, he just seems unaffected. There's no anything involving like him acting this way. And the reason I think that is because the dragons wouldn't be affected by magic unless they are, you know, the dragon slayers or have the dragon attribute pushed in them. So to me, in my head, I think the reason that, you know, the Signario sisters specifically did all this, like they were the ones to do this rather, is because alchemy was involved in the ability and like the whole setup for this. And again, I really want to know what the ability that they did to put everybody in the situation, like what exactly was going on. Because with Viernes, if it's alchemy, it makes sense why a lower level alchemist wouldn't be affecting him, because he would just, yeah, shrug it off. This is below me, so I can just null. And with the other dragon gods, they wouldn't have any, you know, if this is alchemy based, you know, buffed by Igni or something, or, you know, X, Y, or Z, it would make sense as to why they wouldn't be able to normally resist it with the Lacrima all present and everything going on. So with Gray, I would say specifically to him, I want Gray to I want Gray to get something new going, like for later, but I don't want it to be in a way that feels like the Gray is just getting like a giant jump skip. If we have something like Selene brings over all of Diablos, and the Diablos members team up and they all go and fight Viernes, Gray becoming more of the spotlight, like with Natsu gone, Gray has Natsu's spot where it gets down to the wire, and you know everyone's counting on Gray, and Gray is able to finish the job, and they maybe everyone gives him his last remaining bits of magic, so he gets a buff, and he's the one that gets to beat him, and then you just show maybe a further progressed form for Gray, and it's different because maybe they say it's like, oh, maybe it's like similar to how the idea of the seeds work with their powers. It with Devil Slayer specifically, it creates a demon, and it's similar to like how the tailed beasts are in Naruto, where but it's like they're born there. So Gray would have some demon of ice that would then be like having a tailed beast going on with him. Just imagine that. It's like reverse with Igneel, where Igneel adopts Natsu. Gray has little demon babies that spawns from his magic. I think that would be really cool. I don't know, something just neat like that, because if you had something specific that was, I don't know, that ended up somehow in Legends or lore status, maybe there's like, oh, some village talked about this type of creature and it's a god of ice demons, and you see it's in somebody's lore, and you're like, oh wow, look, it looks just like him, and it's Gray that's also in the mural, and then you're like, oh well, Gray also was in some province. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be that direct, but things that set him up to where you can connect more dots than just going from point A way over to point B. It's like, no, you're going to point A to point J and every other letter in between, and you're skipping some, but you're just having a much better drive down. But the idea, again, it's hard when Gray doesn't have anything directly worked on, like, because his powers, like I mentioned, he's done a lot with gaining small bits of different areas of his powers, but I would really like to see a new just general one-on-one fight where he doesn't, sorry, not one-on-one fight where he is Gray centered and he's the one that's going to progress going out of it, if it's not going to be a one-on-one fight rather. But I also still really like the idea that if Selene is going to deal with Viernes, then Lekka will show up and we can have Gray versus Lekka. I think that would be really, really cool, but who knows. Other than that, I mean, I thought this chapter read fairly fast. I mean, it was an action chapter, but it was more so because Selene showing up was a complete and total surprise. I don't know. I would have loved to see more of Gray just doing cool attacks and just escalating every time he, one doesn't work. But other than that, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. I've been rambling a little bit, but surprisingly, this one isn't too long. We'll talk to you guys later, though. Bye.